Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are so glad that you were able to come tonight and join us here. We are thankful for your presence with us and the solidarity and love that your presence reveals. And so this session tonight is sponsored by Bridge Builders. Bridge Builders, Bob is going to tell us a little bit more about that in just a minute, but there are many of us who are bridge builders here and people who long to connect with others, all others, wherever we can. So I would like to start this time together with a prayer, and this is written by Walter Brueggemann, theologian. So if you will, let us pray together. We looked and discovered, as we had not seen, the sweep and wonder of your governance, the largeness of your vision, and the expansiveness of your house of prayer. We looked and then noticed, as for the first time, that the company of those who trust you is very large, very mixed, very diverse. We watched and saw that you are gathering others alongside us. You have gathered us as your chosen, but your gathering does not stop with us. You gather others as your people, all of us, those who have long been chosen and others now gathered, all of us at prayer in your house, all of us at Sabbath in your creation, all of us together in covenant, all of us together according to your wide purpose. Lord, continue to open our hearts to one another, to all one another's everywhere. Help us to realize that you are a Father, a God. You are a Spirit that loves us so well. You want what is best for each and every one of us. And what is best for us is to love one another well. And so help us tonight as we learn together to open our hearts further to each other. I pray this in your holy name. Amen.
Good evening. Jim will need this a little higher too. So, who are the bridge builders? We are local citizens working together toward racial and ethnic harmony. We meet once a month to find common ground with each other while enjoying our diversity, and we advocate when needed. We're largely from the congregations of First Broad Street and Central Baptist Church, but also St. Dominic's, Christ Fellowship, and several others. And we're happy to welcome more. Bridgers are at our best when we're working on projects. This project, the plight of immigrants, came from a suggestion by the United Women of Faith. When I took the idea to Reverend Eastridge, she said, and I'll quote, "I don't know what we can do, but I know we can't just do nothing." And there it is. It is intentional that our topic is immigrants and not immigration. Immigration policy is the law of the land, and per the passage in the Gospels, we can render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. Immigrants are people from God and in his image. That passage tells us that while we can meet our earthly civic obligations, we at the same time have a spiritual obligation not to mistreat immigrants, nor to depict them as less than human. So where to begin? I once had a colleague who would say, "Don't just do something, stand there." And it was his way of saying, don't react, take a moment, and then respond. We all know what we've seen recently is not really new. So let's first take a moment just to see how we got here. We're fortunate and grateful to have Jim Welch presenting tonight. If anyone doesn't know Jim, in addition to a career teaching history in the classroom, he's had other careers as well, always centered around learning and sharing, whether that's science, safety, service, or faith. Jim Welch.
This is a great start, isn't it? Did I take my folder somewhere? Is senility setting in? Ah. Ah. Not that, listen, I can wing it. It's not like it's just, I'm just like, okay, where's my folder? Somebody may be sitting there with my folder and is going, that's not what he's saying. So first and foremost, let me give a disclaimer here, all right? This presentation that I'm going to do for you tonight was created and compiled by me, and I am solely responsible for its content. What I present here this evening as an invited speaker, I am a member of this church. I was baptized in this church. I was confirmed in this church. I've been in this church all my life, which is a really long time. So my connection is very deep with this church. But my comments tonight should not be construed as being officially or unofficially representative of this church or the United Methodist Church. Okay? So this is just Jimmy and you. I look around and it's dark out there now, but we are all children of immigrants. Everybody in this room is a child of an immigrant. And chances are pretty good. We're going to start off this way. Chances are pretty good that unless you go way, way back, your forefathers and foremothers were treated much like some people are treating others today. And they were also treated well by others. And that's part of the reason we are sitting in this room today. I'm not a big Ancestry.com person. I'm not, as my father said when I started wanting to look into the family histories, you really don't want to do that. That's not exactly who we come from. But my lineage are from the Scottish Burns and the Campbells, from the French Demars, and from Wales, which is where we get the Welch part, because a lot of people in Wales didn't even have a last name. They were just they were Welch. That's what they were. And to give you an idea of who the Welch were to this day, anybody watch Escape to the Country? Does anybody else watch that show besides my wife? Okay, so you need to watch Escape to the Country. If you cross over into Wales, the property values drop by about a third. That says a lot about Wales, even to this day, right? So that's the core of my ancestry. I always like to, when I do a history kind of thing, I always like to, like I did in my teaching career, I used to put up a slide or have something on the board about what happened on this day, because it's important for us to grasp, even as panicky as we get sometimes, that something can happen each and every day that affects society for a long time to come. And so one of the examples, just to kind of match today with 1494. In 1494, there was a guy born in Germany named Georgius Agricola. He is considered the father of mineralogy, and he coined the term petroleum. Here we are in the church, and James VI of Scotland was crowned King James I of England on this day in 1603. Anybody not have a King James Bible in their home? The province of Carolina, do I have any Carolinians, north or south?
Indeed.
The province of Carolina was granted a charter on this date in 1663. You'll get divided in 1712 into North and South Carolina, but the province of Carolina, by the English grant, stretched from the Atlantic to the Mississippi and down to the Gulf. And Tennessee was once part of North Carolina. Great Britain passed the Quartering Act on this date in 1765. That was one of the intolerable acts, and it was one that gave the British government the right to house their soldiers in your home. The people that lived here didn't take that very well. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, washed in blood, of His Spirit, once in His love. This is my story, this is my song, sing my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Fanny Crosby was born on this day in 1820. She wrote over 9,000 songs. She was blind at birth. And her forefathers immigrated to this country in 1635 as Puritans, which basically means they got tossed out of England. Mendacity, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, premiered on Broadway in 1955. And in 1976, U.S. President Gerald Ford called for a nationwide vaccine program for swine flu. That did not go over well either. All right, so here we go. We're going to look at the history of the immigrant, and this is, I proclaim myself a Christian. I am redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. But this is a two-tool presentation. We're going to get some of it from a history book. We're going to get some of it from the Bible. And here's what we're going to need to start off with a quick understanding about, is that the Bible is a great religious book and not so great a history book. It's a good history book, but it's a not so great history book. You with me? Okay? Because we don't have necessarily dates and places and all this, and it's stories that are recorded long time after. And so those of us who are Bible believers, it is a primary source for us in our spiritual journey, but it's not a great history book. I do the confirmation class here, and I do a thing on the birth of Christ, and I ask children, when was Jesus born? And they go, December 25th. And I go, we don't know. And they look at me and go, no, really? No, we don't know. I go, what year was he born? Like 1? No, we don't know. So it's really. All right. A history book, you can't, whether it's American history, world history, whatever history, it's going to have religion in it. There is not human history without religion, because religion goes back as far. In every civilization we know and study, religion is present. It is never completely absent. It is always there. But a history book is not a religious text. It is a history book, all right? So we're going to be bouncing kind of back and forth. very quickly, some problems with history when we get to this. First of all, prehistory is made up of guesses that are built on discoveries. Real quick. Truth is often based using tenets as evidence. All right? Something that you believe, and if you believe it is true, okay, then that sometimes makes it true and absolute, even without necessarily proof. It's usually his story, not hers. And that has to do with traditionally the storytellers of men are men. And we tell things, that's why I got this picture of this woman with her eyes, and I don't care. The winner story is the one most often repeated. The more often a story is repeated, the more often it is validated. If you keep telling the same story, back again to my days as a history teacher, one of the things that I had to convince my students about was that John Smith was never married to Pocahontas. I saw the movie. We've got the video at home. You want to see it? Human memory is both selective and fragile. I'm not a lawyer, but I think this is one of those things they teach you in law school, right? All right. Literary reshaping. There's a phrase you need to know. Literary reshaping occurs through language translations and known outcomes. So if we take history that is in one language and translate it to another, it loses something along the way because there's not an English word for every other word out there. You know, ministers love telling us about Hebrew and Latin and Greek, right? And how these were in the words. And the different translations or versions of the Bible that tell the stories using different words, right? Okay? So that's called literary reshaping. Literary reshaping also happens when you know what the outcome already is. So if we're studying the American Civil War, it's been literary reshaped because we know who won. Right? That's not necessarily the story of what was going on before or during, but once it's over, we start telling the story because we know how it ends. And that's called literary reshaping. Untruths spread faster than truth and have a very long shelf life. Accurate history is always politically and or religiously offensive and argumentative to somebody. Always. So when somebody says something, and this is one of these big things going on now. I saw this thing on like scrolling through some social media thing, and this teacher is reading emails from parents, and a parent has sent him an email complaining about him teaching the Great Depression because that's not happy history. Really. That's why we teach it. History is not a science. It's history. Correlation is not causation. That's where the science part comes in. But correlation is not causation. We sometimes get the causation, go back up to the literary reshaping. We go back and we go, aha. I just read a fascinating book about what the press was reporting about Germany in the 1930s. And it's much, much different than what the press was reporting after World War II, right? History may or may not repeat itself. That's one of those untruths that's often repeated. History repeats itself. No, it might, but it might not. Because we really don't know how one group of humans a singular human will react to similar circumstances, much less a group. We can look at things that are happening now. We can say, oh, that's just like then, right? But we don't necessarily know if the results are going to be exactly the same. All right, another part is context, context, context. That's a real rule, both in the religious part and in the history part, is putting things in the context of their time. That's the first thing you have to do. The time is different. Life is different. My life right now is very, very much different than my life was at 18. With the technology that's there, with all that other kind of stuff, it's very different. The time is different. And there is no going back on that. Culture. The culture is shaped often by the time. Culture is shaped by the technology. Culture is shaped by what's out there, what we are reacting to. Culture is shaped by this thing right here. All right? If they didn't have this, if they don't have this instant communication and watching and seeing what everybody's doing, it's different. All right? The places evolve. They're different over time. They change just like cultures do, and the economics of a situation. Whatever was happening at that time is what motivated the changes that were going that way. And I promise you I'm going to get to immigrants here in a minute. All right, so some significant biblical examples that we look at where people are moving in the Bible. All right? These are some of the significant stories. Adam and Eve are cast from the Garden of Eden. Do you think about that? All right, so we're going to, if we accept, if it is part of your religious tenet that Adam and Eve are indeed the first two human beings on the planet Earth, they were thrown out. That's part of that story, right? That's a truth, that they were there. There's no evidence of that. But if you believe it because you believe it, that's cool, all right? But there's no evidence of it. But they were thrown out of the Garden of Eden, which means the Garden of Eden was a place, and there was a place outside the place. And they got thrown outside into the place that was outside the place. Did you ever think of it that way? All right? And they weren't in the place anymore. They were in another place. So you have part of this whole Judaic story is you lose your place. They're going to lose their place again. Okay? Moses brings the Jews out of Egypt. We have no idea how they got there in the first place. What were the Jews doing in Egypt? That's a history question. Okay? The Bible really doesn't answer that. It has a concept about why they're there, but it's not exact. But we know there was a large population of Jews from this story of the Exodus, and we know that they were living in bondage, but we don't know that they were always that way. That may have been something that happened later on in their history, that they diminished in that society to the point that they were in this enclave that today we would call a ghetto, not in a racial sense, but in a community sense. That they were all in one place, and they were enclosed in that one place, and they couldn't live anywhere else. I mean, if you get into that story, that's pretty much what they were, and Moses gets sent to take those people out and take them to the land that is supposed to be theirs, right? So that's really the first major mass movement of people that we have in the Bible. We have the Assyrian exile that's in 2 Kings. The Babylonian captivity exile that happened in 6th century BC. There's multiple references to that in the Old Testament. And then we have the Roman occupation of Palestine. It's not Israel anymore. It's Palestine. And in that Roman occupation, we learn about Herod, and we learn about why people have to move around. And we'll get to that. So, the Bible and immigration, depending on the translation, there's about 140 Bible verses. If you haven't looked this up, go to AI and do it. There's about 140 Bible verses that specifically address strangers, aliens, sojourners, and foreigners. The word immigrant is not in there. We can put it in there now in a new translation or a new version of the Bible. We could use the word immigrant, but the word immigrant itself doesn't even appear until the late 18th century in the English language. All right? Those of us sitting in the room, we are one of the reasons that word was invented. because there wasn't a word to describe us. All right? There was no Hebrew or Greek word for immigrant. The Hebrew word ger and the Greek word xenos were translated in those terms. So when you see those words in the Bible, those words up there, normally it's referring to the Hebrew or the Greek, which defines those people as those things. All right? Now, I think that the word that in our popular news culture that we use now to define a lot of people who are present in our country is the word alien, as opposed to foreigner. And there's a purpose to that. Alien carries with it a negative connotation that you are different from. If you go as a tourist to Europe, you are a foreigner. You are not an alien. Right? So you understand the power of the word there. All right. Now, one of my favorite things that's posted oftentimes in social media is this verse out of Deuteronomy that plays to the fear of immigrants as aliens. And it's foreigners who live in your land will gain more and more power while you gradually lose yours. They will have money to lend you, but you will have none to lend them. In the end, they will be your rulers. Have any of you seen that in looking at social media? Any of you? No? Well, the real fun part of that is and I always come back with it's Bible verse tic-tac-toe, right? And if you know your Bible verses, you know it's like playing tic-tac-toe. It's cat. Every game, if you know a Bible verse, it's going to end in a tie. But this one won't, because the preface to that is verse 15 that says, if, however, you do not obey the Lord your God by carefully following all his commandments and statutes I am giving you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. And prior to that are all those verses about how well you should treat foreigners. The commandments to treat them well. But if you don't follow that commandment, that can happen. If you don't, what they're saying is if you don't make a friend of the foreigner, if you don't make a friend of the alien, if you don't treat them with respect, they're going to win. All right. So here's where I come into my soups de jour. I look at this in a lot of ways. So people go, oh, that's immigrants. That's all of us from all kinds of different places. And then we just kind of monochromatic there with the broccoli cheese soup, right? Obviously, this Italian noodle whatever thing, it looks like it fell off something at Carrabba's. But that looks delicious. But I kind of look at this in a spiritual sense, if you'll hang with me here. Look at that as the Bible and all the different stories and all the different things that we're told good and bad and all that other kind of stuff. And what it is that we should do, right? And at the end of all this, we get to the New Testament. When we're New Testament folks, I'm a New Testament guy. That doesn't mean I throw the Old Testament out. It means I'm a New Testament guy, because in the New Testament, there's this story that's repeated like twice where these guys ask Jesus, which are the greater commandments? And he answers that question very simply with two ingredients. Love the Lord your God with all you got, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that soup will sustain you. So we're going to talk about now the socio-political part of all this. We talk about immigrants. So there are two realms in society. Are you with me here? Are we having fun yet? All right, good. There are two realms. There's a social realm and a political realm. We are in a social realm in this room, okay? We are all following informal rules. Y'all are sitting there nicely and politely and all this other kind of stuff, and you're listening to the program because that's a social thing to do, okay? There are social units. The family is a social unit. We have external social units that we're part of. And these are things that they have their own culture. They have rules, but how those rules are enforced is it varies from one thing to another, varies from situation to situation. But we learn how to pick up on those things as we grow up. That's the social realm. That's the apolitical realm. Our families are not political. I will say this, and I will say this boldly. It is not meant for you to be Christian, to be political to a particular point of politics. It is not meant for me to be that way. Because African Christians don't care what political party I belong to. They care that I'm a Christian. They don't care who I vote for. They care that I'm a Christian. I know this because I know African Christians. I know Asian Christians. I know European Christians. And Christ is around the world. He is not just in our little realm. All right? Then we go over to the political realm. Now, the political realm is where our rules are formalized, they're enforced, there is authority, okay? There are things that are built in, and there have been political systems throughout the Bible except for the Garden of Eden. But that was really a political system because God ran it. He had one rule: don't eat from that tree. You eat from the tree, you're gone, okay? And you have to leave the boundaries because there have always been boundaries and borders. He threw them out of the Garden of Eden. Remember, there is another place. The Garden of Eden is a place. It had boundaries. It had borders. There was another place outside of that. And we've had borders and boundaries ever since. Borders and boundaries exist throughout written history. And we have found, archaeologists have found relics of boundary markers that predate written history. Most boundaries throughout history have been geographic, tops of mountains, rivers, oceans, seas, things like that. Modern boundaries include things like latitude and longitude lines and all that other kind of stuff. We get these GPS things, again, on this little thing, tell us exactly where we are, latitude and longitude-wise. And those kind of borders are brand new. But real within that political realm is the authority of a government to control its borders, to control its boundaries, to determine how you become a citizen, to determine who gets in and who gets out. And one of the interesting little tidbits in world history is that the country that was probably the most famous for, in early history, for enforcing and controlling its borders was Egypt. Okay? The Roman Empire's borders and boundaries just kept expanding. But Egypt, it has this history of controlling all this stuff. The church rests in the middle. It's already been said once, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's, all right? So when Jesus is telling them with this Roman coin, he's saying this political structure is always going to exist. This political realm, wherever you are, whenever you are there, wherever on the planet Earth, it will always be there. It will always be something of contention. That is the political realm. And the politicians make those rules. But in the social realm, we talk about how do we make those rules congruent with our faith and what we are called to do. And that's the socio-political realm of it. So we look at the causes of human migration. And most human migration is, in our earlier history, is large-scale migration. And only recently has it been ramped back up to that. But we have these periods of time where migration is actually relatively small with people moving around. But there are things that happen geographically and naturally and politically that make people want to move. And by the way, these slides, Wes, I'll have a copy of them. If y'all ever want a copy, everything I do is, you can have them. Hunger and food insecurity is the number one cause of human migration. If you're hungry, you move. If you don't have food, you move. If you don't have water, you move. Okay? That's food insecurity. One of the things that I learned in my last career in Africa, in human migration, many of the plains where livestock, they used to raise livestock, are turning into desert. And as a result, they have no livestock, and the people have to move. And they've done nothing but keep livestock for 3,000 years, right? But now they've got to go figure out how to do something else, and their skill set is livestock, right? There comes a point where you have to move. Persecution is the next big thing, a persecuted group. And they may move by choice or they may move by force. But persecution, if a particular group is persecuted and they have an opportunity to go somewhere and not be persecuted, that's what they will do. It's interesting in world history is to follow the movement of the Judaic people, of certain groups of Judaic people who always got blamed for the bad things that were happening. And when they get blamed for the bad things that were happening, people would start to kill them, and they would start to do all kinds of things, and so the Judaic people would pick themselves up and move. And by different kind of a tribal sort of thing. But persecution is a big one. War makes people move. War creates all kinds of insecurity. When we bomb cities, and this is not we being a world global sense, not necessarily what we are doing now, although this is what we're doing. When you bomb cities, when you bomb apartment buildings, when you bomb where people live, they have to move. And it's not like if you bomb one neighborhood, they want to move to the next one. They want to get the hell out. Right? They want to get away from it. So war makes people move. Natural disasters make people move. They lose their homes. They lose their farms. They lose their jobs. They lose because of a natural disaster. So they move. The next one is they move because they are exiled or they have been captured. And the African Americans that are among us, for the most part, came here because their ancestors were captured. It's not like they wanted to come. They didn't go looking for a ticket on that boat that came over here. All right? So their migration was not one of their choice. Their migration was one that was created by an economic market that was outside of their control and their domain. And they ended up here. And that still happens with people when they're in a captive situation and they are forced to move. Opportunity. When something happens that gives an economic boost, that you can take care of your food or insecurity. You hear of something that's happening somewhere. So if I toss out just a basic American history thing, what are some of the largest migrations in American history? Just what? Gold rush, right? Comes right up to mind, right? Well, Americans weren't the only ones going to California, right? There's gold there. When they discovered gold in Australia, people went to Australia. If there's opportunity somewhere to get rich, if there's opportunity to change your living standards significantly, people want to do that. That's opportunity. The next one is family. You have family somewhere. Your family you have relatives somewhere, they've been there, and eventually you want to go there too. Now, here's the interesting thing on mass migration. When all these other things happen, the interesting thing is in almost every situation, most people stay exactly where they are. Not everybody moves. We sometimes get this visual impression that everybody's leaving Venezuela. No, they're not. Most people are staying, right? We have a story in our history after the American Civil War. The thing was that there was a migration of black Americans to the north, but do you know where most black Americans stayed? Right here, right where they were. And to this day, they're here. Okay? So it's not like everybody goes when one of these bad things happen. But mass migration is when they come in larger numbers than just moving for family. So here are some driving factors here. How am I doing on time? We doing all right? Okay. The 4 C's are conquering, converting, colonialism, and capitalism. These are the 4 C's that really start to move migration. Conquering. If you are anywhere above 50 degrees north latitude in your family heritage and somewhere between 2 longitude belts, you got Viking in you. If you've done an Ancestry.com, you got a little Viking in you because those boys got around. But they also created some insecurity that caused people to move. But they're conquering. The Vikings moved around. They were the first people to reach the shores of North America, right? From Europe. So converting, once this new world, I love this, new world, once the new world has been discovered by the old world being Europe, the new world being North and South America, although the people had been here just as long as people had never mind. Anyway. The old world and the old world, when they collide. So the church was trying to redefine itself, the church being the Holy Roman Church, okay? That's when we're talking about the church. We're in the 1500s. We're not into the Protestant kind of thing yet. The church is trying to redefine itself because after the fall of the Roman Empire, the church became not only the social structure, it became the political structure. Remember that socio-political thing? The Holy Roman Church became that. So the Protestant Reformation was far more about just the church. It had to do with questioning the authority of the church in social realms and political realms. That gets kind of complicated. But the church had been essentially the center of the morality of Europe. It's really quite that simple. And when they started to lose that authority, you can start reading about all that's going wrong with the popes and the Medicis and all that other kind of stuff starts coming in. And the church is really trying to define what it is, what its role is in this new developing world, okay? And when they discover there's this whole world over here and these people aren't Christian, then what we got to do is we've got to go convert these people. That's our new mission, is to go convert those people, all right? So part of that movement has to do with coming here to convert people. And part of the thing is when we get into that Protestant thing, which causes all kinds of splits in the church, and when Henry VIII wants a divorce, and it gets really complicated on down. But the different, and he establishes the Church of England, and then people get angry at the Church of England and start splitting off from it, and those people need a place to go. And so religion and history, you can't separate the two. All right. Then you look at a world map in the 18th century. That's this thing down here in the corner. And the world map in the 18th century is made up of empires. Okay? And those empires were built. This colonialism starts to rise. So you start building colonies. You start putting your people where other people are. And you claim the land because you can. That sounds familiar. So anyway, so you go and you encourage this migration. You actually raise money and fund it. You say, here you go over there and live. You don't like it over here? Go over there. We'll even pay for your ticket on the boat. You just go. All right? So that colonialism starts to build that up over here, that migration, that coming here. And as it does that, the economic opportunities to come for people in Europe start to get greater and greater and greater. I mean, if English colonization had stopped with Roanoke Island, that's the lost colony, we don't know where those people ended up. But, it's very simple. They could go, history repeats itself. We send more people, they'll disappear. No, they didn't. Right? So they built up. So again, this is not, so that colonialism built up, and that created all kinds of things, so that when bad things happened over there, people could go somewhere where their political structure didn't change. So when we talk about the people coming to America, in that period of time under colonialism, when people came to here, they weren't going from leaving their king behind. They weren't leaving their parliament behind. They weren't immigrating to another country. They were going to another place that their country claimed was theirs. And in North and South America, that was primarily England, France, Spain, Portugal, okay? The part of those empires. And they were the governance structure that set up in those. And then capitalism, the trade that starts, the massive trade that starts under colonization creates more opportunities, right? And the more opportunities that create, the better off people get. And the better off people get, they start sitting there thinking, yeah, I don't need a king. So they decide throughout those colonies, they start one by one deciding, we need to be independent. So they start creating their own political structures. And when they create their own political structures, their social structure starts to change because they have new identities. So if your ancestors came to this country before the American Revolution, they came here as British citizens, and they never gave up their British citizenship to do it. My Demars that I mentioned, they were Huguenots, which was French Protestants, and they settled first in Acadia in northern Canada, and they were persecuted up there, and so they kept moving south, and that's in that particular group. All right. So the culture path of immigrants and hosts. This is where, okay, bridge builders, this is where you come in. All right. The culture path is that you are first foreign. You are first different. You are first noticeable. You are first, you're different. You are foreign. And the path that is expected and what you probably do, and what you just need to do is just kind of think of this is the same thing as a child from baby up. All right? What you do when you come is something different, and if you want to be this other thing, is you start to imitate what they do. Slowly but surely, you start to imitate. You imitate their language. You imitate the way they dress. You imitate the music that they play and they listen to. You start to imitate so that you don't look so foreign and you don't sound so foreign, and you want to get rid of your accent. And I want you to know I took this Southern Appalachian accent and I milked it like a cow all over the world. But anyway, what you want to do is imitate. And as you imitate, you start to assimilate. And people don't, as a general rule, they don't reach out to assimilate you until you are imitating them. You with me on this? Okay. They don't. I'm going to say this one more time. You don't assimilate them until you see them imitate. So their closest connection often doesn't happen until they get to imitate. All right? to be effective at assimilation, from an outsider point of view, that content has to be made when they are foreign. Because if you make the contact when they are foreign, they will want to imitate. Now here's the other thing that happens. When you do this with respect, and I use those words, with respect, is you assimilate part of their culture into yours. And you have pizza. Right? You broaden your horizons at the same time they broaden theirs. And we make that as much of the American culture as apple pie that we got from Germans. All right? So assimilation is achieved through social connections. Again, this is where I'm talking to my audience here, right? The social connections come first. Remember that the foreigner or the alien is not necessarily the person that's going to reach out to someone who doesn't look like them or sound like them, because they don't know if they can trust them or not, because they are in a foreign place and they don't yet know where they are safe and where they are not safe. But as social connections are built, you start to feel safe. You start to feel safe if you have someone who doesn't look like you, but they still like you. Because out of that comes social cohesion. You start to introduce, and this is the role of the church, people. This is the primary role of the church and God's people. It's to love your neighbors, you love yourself, you connect with them. And you invite them to things so that social cohesion can take place. The church is a place where social cohesion takes place. All right? Historically, it has been. You don't probably, if you go into your own family history, if you've been here for a few generations, you don't have to go back too far. Church is where your mom and dad met. My mom and dad met at a pie supper at a Methodist church in McDonald, Tennessee. But that's the social cohesion part, is where this mass interaction takes place. Look in this audience, and we're talking about immigrants. Anybody see an immigrant in here? I'm missing it, right? Because while we can talk about it, do we actually do the reaching to make it happen? Right? Okay? Because that social cohesion builds up social capital. And that social capital is what powers us as a culture. That social capital is what makes us a great nation, right? It's through that we share each other's values and we share each other's ideals and dreams, and we create an atmosphere, an economic atmosphere, a political atmosphere, all those kind of things that can power that on. But it doesn't happen if we don't start making those immediate connections. So keep this image in mind. Assimilation is a crock pot. It's not a microwave. We have a modern expectation that a foreigner coming in, that an alien coming into this country, whatever their documentation, that they're supposed to instantly be an American. That they're supposed to instantly find a church, that they're supposed to instantly do all these other kind of things. And it's not that, it doesn't work that way. It takes a generation. It's a crock pot process. Our technology, we have to look at these as being barriers or tools, and the reason being that they can, that they, and when I say they, I'm talking about people who are from other cultures in this culture, it no longer necessitates them to assimilate into this culture, to have contact, to have social contact with people, even if it's not in person. Because chances are most of the communication that the people in this room do is something online or on this. And the same is true for anybody that has access to one of these, right? So I don't need to learn another language if I can just keep talking to people who have my language. I can get a mobile phone. I can call internationally on this thing. It doesn't cost me a dime. This is part of the monthly fee, right? There's no such thing as long distance. I can FaceTime anybody, anywhere in the world, talk to them, okay? So that isolates us even more, even though we can contact more people than we ever dreamed that we could, faster than we could, and for less money than we ever thought we could. The idea that there are television stations that you can watch in any language, or you can get subtitles, and Vicki and I do subtitles because I can't hear, but you can get subtitles, you can watch TV, you can do all this you don't have to get out anymore. That's just part of the reality. The internet is instant. We're assimilating with technology. We're not assimilating with each other. We're letting technology, even our own lives, we're letting it govern our own lives. Well, let's talk quickly about when natives become foreigners. And this is when you live in a land that all of a sudden is run by somebody else. Okay? So, when I asked John Rowe, he's one of our associate pastors here, and he was, after one of his sermons, I asked him, I said, John, do you ever ask, what did the people who were living in Palestine, what did those people do wrong that God said to these other people, that's your land, not theirs? That all of a sudden there's this invading force coming from someplace, and they're saying this God says this is their land. Now, I'm not arguing with the story itself, but you just, again, that's the history part of me going, what was it? What was it about that place that all of a sudden this belongs to somebody else? And you become foreigners in your own place. We see that in modern-day Palestine as well, right? They live in a land that they do not control. But they've been there for a few thousand years. So in the time of Jesus, we had the Roman Empire, right? So we see that's wrapping around. And we see the stories in the time of Jesus where they were under Roman control, right? So there is this, you have this social rule of the Sanhedrin kind of thing, but the political role was that of the Romans. So you were foreigners in your own land and expected to assimilate to a culture that was not that of your homeland. And I think that's a different kind of immigration problem that warrants our looking at it as a church. What are the rights of people whose land somebody took? Like the people who were here first. What did they do wrong? And they had no borders. That wasn't part of their culture because it wasn't part of their culture that you could own land. Here's what the United States looked like in 1821. I just want to show you this, and just as a quick visual. The United States is the stuff up here in pink. These are the states. We had just acquired Florida from Spain. That was part of Spanish territory. We acquired it because the slaves in the Deep South were escaping south, not north, because they could go into Spanish Florida. All right? The territories were claimed by the British, but all New Spain was part of Spain, which was then part of Mexico. So you see that we have a whole swath of land there that was part of, once the Texicans got their independence, they became the Republic of Texas. When they became the Republic of Texas, there were still more Mexicans in Texas than there were Texicans in Texas. When California became a state, there were more Spaniards, there were more people who spoke Spanish in California than there were people who spoke English in California, which is why the California Constitution had to be written in 2 different languages, Spanish and English, which I guess is why California is still different to this day, huh? All right, blood, soil, and citizenship, real quickly. Citizenship is at the core of this, being protective of who gets to call themselves, in our situation, who gets to call themselves an American. How do you get that way? That belongs in the political spectrum. Who gets to call themselves a human being? That belongs in the social spectrum. Okay? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar, render unto God what is God's. So the intro to this, about immigrants are human beings, first and foremost. Doesn't matter what kind of piece of paper they have, they're a human being. So just think in terms of immigrant. Now, whether they are legal or whether they are undocumented, that's separate. That's a political issue. The social issue is that they are human beings. All right? So what is the process? And every country, including our own, listen to me very clearly, every country has a right to control its borders. That's part of the political spectrum, right? Every country has the right to admit or not admit anybody they want to. When you go visit another country, every country has a right to tell you can't come in. That's part of the political spectrum. That's it, all right? But who gets to be a citizen? If you're there, who gets to be a citizen? The whole idea of citizenship has been different for different places all over. We know that Paul was very special because he was a Roman citizen, right? Because the citizenship of Rome had certain levels of qualification and they had levels of citizenship. You could be this kind of citizen or this kind of citizen, but it was much better than not being any kind of citizen. And most people who were in the Roman Empire were mean. They were not any kind of citizen, nor was there any process for them to become citizens. All right? So the idea of citizenship on a European basis, we mostly get that from our Anglo heritage, our English heritage, in defining who that is. So by blood is you are what you are born. Because before we knew all the other stuff that's in blood, it was just kind of like whatever you are because your parents are. If you were Jewish because your parents are. If you were Catholic because your parents are. That's in your blood. The only way you could not be those things if you were born that way was to be thrown out. All right? Citizenship was the same way. Citizenship by blood. But that really cranks up in the Middle Ages with heraldry. How many of you have a coat of arms? All right, so you start taking this real thing about the family name. Now we're starting to get everybody's getting a last name. All right? And when everybody starts to get a last name, because only special people had last names, when you start getting last names, people start taking this blood stuff really seriously, this ancestry and all that. So citizenship by blood is special. Well, when we start doing that thing, go back to that slide, and these people over here said, I don't need a king anymore. Well, how are you no longer a British citizen if you were born one? All right? How do you just get rid of that? Well, the political structure changed it. And in 1790, the United States passed its first citizenship law, which said if you were free white and you'd lived here for 2 years, you're a U.S. citizen. That was our equal definition of a citizen. Free white means you weren't indentured, you were white, you've lived here for 2 years, that's it. There's no oath, there's no proving anything, there's no anything, that's it. So essentially from that point on, if you came from that blood, mama, daddy, either one, you were American, all right? We also did it, and this is one of the things, if you look at this green stuff, the green stuff is by soil, and the reason all those countries over there have birth by soil, like we do, where you're born here, is because we threw the other people out, right? Because if you were in South America, you were either a Portuguese citizen or a Spanish citizen, and when you threw them out, You weren't that anymore. So where you were born became as important as your blood. So we were blood and soil. And we extended that with the 14th Amendment at the end of the American Civil War and the emancipation of the slave population. We amended that to where it applied to people who were of color. Not every color, because we don't make American Indian citizens for a long time later. All right? But by soil extended to them, because their ancestors could not be citizens because they were not white. They were not white. No matter how much they assimilated, they couldn't be a citizen because they weren't white. The Dred Scott case, Dred Scott couldn't bring a case before the Supreme Court. It's what they ruled, because he wasn't a citizen and he couldn't bring a case before the Supreme Court because of that. So the 14th Amendment, so we are a blood and soil kind of thing, which takes into the whole idea of naturalization for immigrants to start that first generation kind of thing going. All right, the historic continuum of the constant change of social order, and I'm going to close with this, has to do with protecting yourselves from order and chaos and somewhere in between. So one of the historians that influenced me in my life was also a philosopher named Will Durant. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Will Durant, but he wrote this 11-volume thing on the story of civilization. I have not read all 11 volumes, nor will I ever read all 11 volumes. You just read enough of it to get a taste of it, and that's good. There is an abridged version of it that I have read, and it's good, and I highly recommend it. But his theory has to do with competition is what drives us. It drives us good and it drives us bad. People who have a fear of immigrants, my thought is, when you have a fear of immigrants, it's you fear their competition. They're going to take my job. They're going to take my food. All of a sudden, I'm feeling food insecurity and economic insecurity and all that. So my thing is just to get through it. But social order is one of those things that changes. We are in just the flow of that ocean. And there are people who, if you think about it, there are people who support all kinds of order, right? It is, for me, and this is opinion thing, right? It troubles me, and it's just me, it troubles me to see military troops in the cities of the United States searching out and arresting people who are undocumented. It has never been. That's not to say I'm not a law and order guy. It is to say that's a little heavy on the order part. That's a little bit more than fighting crime. If you know who the people are who shouldn't be here, that's one thing. If you're just rounding people up, and I don't know that much, if you're just rounding people up because they look like they don't belong here, wow. And if you don't give them the rights as human beings when you contain them, the same rights that other people have in those situations. And understand this, in our legal structure, in our political structure, and we haven't changed this, being here undocumented is a misdemeanor. It's not a felony. If we send out police troops looking for everybody who has an unpaid speeding ticket, and those two things don't necessarily, but you understand there's this fine line between what we allow and what we don't allow. You know that certain things, when you're raising kids, you know they're going to raise a little hell, right? The question is, what are you going to allow and what are you not going to allow? What's that line between order and chaos where you step in? Okay? When either one of those things gets off to the thing, we have no civilization. If we have too much order, we have the Third Reich revisited. If we have too much chaos, we have too much chaos. So we have to be responsible in what we do, both in our faith and in our decisions that we make in the political order for our nation. That's me. But there's something to be had about that. And I think that part of our problem, a huge part of our problem, rests with us because we have not reached out to help these people assimilate into our society until they got in trouble for being here. Because we don't know them by name. We don't know their children. And when we don't know them by name and we don't know their children, it's easy for a state legislator to say they can't go to our schools. But if I know his mama, that'd be a hard decision for me to make. All of a sudden, I'd be seeing a human being. And I'd be dealing with that situation maybe just a little bit differently. The Shema. The Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment is greater than these. Thank you.